concerning the user-centered design and human interaction presented by Professor Tim Moscovitch, University of Huddersfield, UK.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's very nice to be here for my first visit to Egypt. Huddersfield is in the centre of the north of England, between Manchester and Leeds, and it is in a region where there's has been certainly in the past a very strong, thriving textile industry. Things have been downsized fairly considerably, but the School of Design Technology has quite a strong commitment to design, and the major feature associated with design is our commitment to not just technology but also business, and ensuring that the integration of business and design and technology work together in an holistic manner. Well, one of the things that we try to do on a permanent basis is work very closely with industry in a variety of different ways, through sponsored projects, through placements. We have a very high employment record for our students, and we're continuously looking at ways and means of improving the curricula, developing the curricula, not just anticipating industrial demands, but actually moving it forward. One of the things we've been very conscious of for quite some time, that whilst we locate ourselves on this particular end of the spectrum to do with design, we can't just stand still like everybody, like business especially. One has to keep moving forward and be very conscious of what's actually happening out there in the big wide world, and to move forward. One of the key areas that we've been particularly concerned with over the last 2 or 3 years is, as far as design methodology is concerned, as I say, not just integrating design with technology and business, but starting to really get closer and closer and closer to the customer, the consumer, the user. Hence the title of my paper today, User-Centered Design and Human Interaction, and it is really appointed to some of the thoughts that we have, and hopefully some of the directions that we would like to go towards. The first statement that I've got up there actually comes from Ken Grange at Pentagram. Pentagram is a very successful design consultancy, and he said, as I've got on the slide there, 3 parties make up the success of a new product: the designer, the maker, and the user. If you focus primarily upon the needs of the consumer, then the maker will also be well served, and the product should then be able to sell more easily. The designer stands more as a representative of the user than the maker. That's a very intriguing statement, because one of the things traditionally that designers have done for many, many years really is target the object in a variety of different ways, obviously manipulating standard things like line, shape, form, colour, texture, etc., etc. And it takes a long time to actually get those things right, but at the end of the day it's still very much a self-indulgent exercise, targeting the object and making assumptions about the consumer and the user in terms of what their desires, what their needs are. And that's the whole point of the paper. Too many assumptions are made, and what we're trying to do is to try to dispel some of those assumptions by a variety of different ways. So what Ken Grange is suggesting is that the role of the designer in the context that he's described is one of customer interpreter, which is becoming more demanding as the rapidly changing retail environment elevates the consumer into a far more prominent position than in previous generations, with increased purchasing power and greater expectations with regard to quality, choice and price. We've already seen in some of the papers in the conference, certainly one of the key plenary sessions yesterday, things like in textiles and fashion, the lead times. There wasn't that long ago where there were a couple of ranges, a couple of collections per year. We now go into a position where the lead time gets shorter and shorter and shorter, and ranges are, down to 1 a month. Now the impact on the designer in that process is absolutely enormous. How on earth can they actually come to terms with that without improving, enhancing and moving their design methodology forward in order to satisfy that demand? Undoubtedly, customer demand will be more discriminant, with higher expectations in terms of choice, performance, quality, reliability, aftercare, and of course value for money. And in the competition to sell, highly sophisticated technology can be harnessed to promote far wider customization and services. Again, speakers at the conference over the last 2 or 3 days have addressed many of these issues. Improved distribution and supply chain systems, smart fabrics, customization, and interestingly yesterday, some of those intangibles that designers have been struggling with for many, many years. And it was interesting for me to chair a session where there were 2 papers there focusing upon comfort. And how can you get a handle on something, pardon the pun, but how can you get a handle on something like comfort, which is so intangible? But these are the sort of things now that customers are expecting. There's a whole array, the portfolio of things that customers expect are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the designer, working in conjunction with the producer and the manufacturer, has got to get a handle on that. They've got to understand what these key issues are and build it into the design methodology process. Too often, commercial pressure to introduce life-saving products leads to heavy investment in an unfocused innovation process and to products being launched which have very little consumer benefit. A lot of research has shown that if too little time is actually spent on the front end of design in new product development, the likelihood is that when it actually goes through the system at the exit end, the chances of success are actually going to become extremely limited. So it's really important that the time and effort that's spent on the front end of requirements capture becomes more and more significant and more comprehensive and targeted and focused as far as the designer is concerned. In an effort to get to market quickly or conserve money, product developers often stop user research or do only cursory studies with a few consumers. So this front end of design is really very important. The importance of substantial valid requirements capture, especially from the user, alluded to earlier, is really exceedingly important. One of the companies that's actually started to do work in this area and become very successful in trying to get a handle on what consumer user requirements are is an organisation called Sonic Rim. They're actually based in the States, and they were formed by a number of ex-Fitch company. And Fitch was a major design consultancy in London. And they actually make definitions and distinctions between the consumer, the customer, and the user. And as you can see from the slide on the screen, they say that in today's product era, we reduce people to the various roles they play in the design development process. We see and think of them as consumers when they shop, as customers when they buy, and users when they interact with objects. Rarely do we integrate these roles to come to see people in an holistic way. Now, if you think about those definitions and you think about the traditional design methodology and design education that we use, to a certain extent we address the issue of consumers by market research and marketing. As far as really understanding customers when they buy, we don't really do that. And as far as really understanding the users when they interact with objects, the nearest we get to that is really to do with ergonomics and functionality. Again, there's a considerable amount of progress to be made in penetrating far more deeply in each of those 3 areas. And again, there are a number of companies already very successful in doing this already out there in the marketplace. Philips, the white goods manufacturer, based in the Netherlands, they have multidisciplinary teams of people where they have sociologists, psychologists, anthropologists, working with designers, working with technology people, all working together, trying to address all of these issues in an holistic manner. IDEO, based in Silicon Valley in California, is headed up by a guy called Bill Mockridge. They've been focusing upon this particular strategy to do with design methodology for the last 25 years. Highly successful, a lot of major blue chip companies, and a £40 million plus turnover. So the final statement I've got on the screen there comes from Rachel Cooper, who's a professor at Salford University in the UK, who's done quite a lot of research on requirements capture, and as she says there, without a thorough requirements capture process, false assumptions regarding customer, technical, and other requirements may be made. We can't afford to do that, whatever the industry is. Now, as I've already said earlier, predominantly requirements capture in design education normally follows a standard traditional route, and it focuses upon cultural capture. For example, cultural influences and stimulation using image research mechanisms such as forecasting, trends, lifestyle scenarios, and analysing, evaluating, collating these through mood or concept boards. In addition, there are some centres, and we're one of those, that use customer profiling, socio-economic data, segmentation analysis and disposable income analysis, as well as market and marketing research, analysing market trends and existing competitors in the marketplace and new competitors, and measuring that feedback. Now, all of that can actually contribute to design methodology. But what are we doing? Where are our thoughts? What position are we at the moment? And I think I can speak on behalf of the design department and to a certain extent the textile department, of which the head is here, front row here. We're beginning to look towards moving that long-established tradition of the preoccupation with the tangible physical object, as I've alluded to earlier, form, line, structure, colour, texture, etc., as the means of providing what we perceive or have perceived in the past to be the correct, in inverted commas, solution, to the context and environment of the user with the intangible, feelings, perception, culture, experience, comfort factor that I mentioned to earlier. And three areas that we're just beginning to dip our toe into the water, beginning to move forward in. The first is to do with individual people characteristics, such as people's behaviour, associated with sensory perception, their wants, their needs, their aspirations. It's interesting for us in my department, we have a transport design degree, where a lot of research done by the car industry focuses on people's values, doing research and investigation into the values of people and trying to embed that into the design methodology process so that cultural icon, i.e. the car, embeds and captures those particular wants, needs and aspirations. The second is to do with mass people characteristics, such as really understanding cultural norms, ethical, moral stances, economic trends and influences. Now both of those are really reactive strategies. There's another area to do with being proactive, of manipulating people. We can't escape the fact that we're all manipulated in one way or another. Either, every day of our lives basically, because we're bombarded with mass communication. Now, as far as design methodology is concerned, we have to come to terms with that. We can't ignore it. And the sort of things that Sonic Rim are actually already doing and working with blue chip companies are some of the things that I've got up on the screen there. How do they go about it? They address things like listening to what people say, making inferences about what they think, watching what people do, not just willy-nilly, but really analysing and evaluating what people are doing and why they're doing it, observing what people use, uncovering what people know, perceptions that they might have about particular things, reaching towards an understanding of what people feel, sharing in what people dream and imagine. Now, there are two other centres that I'm aware of. One at the University of Alberta, and the other is at Carnegie Mellon University, where the design departments there they're at a similar stage to us, just beginning to change their curricula quite dramatically with a similar view, trying to get closer to the customer, the consumer, the user. So really a summary is that in our view, our School of Design Technology, and certainly my design department, many of the designer-centered approaches to new product development are too generic, too speculative. Designers aren't addressing the right problem. We need to identify what that problem is, and it is concentrated upon people. People use designed objects. We need to know more about them. Too often, the design process relies heavily upon the production of ideas based upon assumptions. We think we're designing things for what people want. We can't really guarantee it. We don't really know and how much of design so far is really based on speculation. How can we reduce that speculation? The predominant concern to date with design education is to equip graduates with cultural and aesthetic skills. That's not enough. It really isn't. An approach which really in this consumer-driven society is, I would suggest, far too loose, far too vague, and driven by the demands of an art, capital A, capital R, capital T approach that's really based upon the 19th century, a 19th century arts and crafts approach. Our consumer society that we live in today is moving at such a fast pace, we can't afford that self-indulgence. We can't afford a design-centered approach where self-expression and personal satisfaction is the main justification of the process. So whilst the design education community is still maintaining and celebrating its diversity, and there's nothing wrong with that, we feel there is a real need to seriously reconsider its understanding and perception of design with the user as the central focus of its activity. And not just satisfying the user, but exceeding the user's expectations, because it's all very well saying, blandly satisfying a consumer requirement. These days, the consumer has got the real bit between his teeth, and the more they want, literally, more and more and more and more. All of these things that we take for granted, we've got to keep on top of that. We've got to keep ahead of those consumers, those customers. Design can make that quantum leap to innovation, but it can also make the ordinary extraordinary. If this doesn't occur, then the marginalisation of design, I would suggest, and designers within industry, not just textiles and fashion, but other industries, will become more acute and continue to be regarded as a mysterious, eccentric, intangible. And in addition, there's also the dangerous possibility that the position and value of design will be downsized and marginalised to the role of one of the many liberal arts. That would have been fatal. Design can give extraordinary added value and make a huge difference to the bottom line, to profitability and competitiveness, but only if the designer adopts a less eccentric, selfish strategy and considers the user as the central focus for his design activity. Design solutions can make people's lives more enjoyable in what we wear, how we live, and the environment we inhabit, and the entertainment, leisure activities we engage in. And it's one of the unique disciplines which can generate that special magic, like music, which gives us such great pleasure. So the notion that we're putting forward is that we really need to move ahead and develop on from this traditional art with a capital A approach to design and consider the user as the central focus for the design activity, not the object, and certainly not the designer. Thank you. Yes.
You want to go to the microphone?
Yes.
Yes.
And no heckling.
No. Gaynor Greenwood, Manchester Metropolitan University. Do you think one of the problems has been that the art and design staff who are teaching in colleges haven't, in normal terms, been taught, and it's sort of self-perpetuated, they haven't been taught proper consumer behaviour. Quite often, a lot of art and design departments are serviced by somebody from the marketing department who teaches consumer behaviour from a textbook about FMCGs or automobiles, and the design students switch off.
I think you're right. But I mean, I think the other problem that we find ourselves in is that, certainly as far as the UK is concerned, after school, many students actually do a foundation course prior to doing their degree, and the large majority of those foundation courses are actually taught by fine artists, not designers. So it's that perpetuates it, and it's almost brainwashing in a way. Art is the driving force, and I think that we've really got to separate. Art, fine art has its place, design has its place, but at the moment we haven't really fully established, the nature of what design can be.
I think I have to comment. I think it's perpetuated, and in another way, a lot of the work I do overseas is with production companies, manufacturing companies, who are very, very good at what they do. They're brilliant at production, they're brilliant at manufacturing to quality. But all the time, they're trying to please the buyer.
Yeah.
And the buyer to them, and if you ask them who their customer is, or their consumer is, or their buyer is, they're talking about Dana Greenwald, who buys for Next or Marks and Spencer's or River Island. And it's that person they're trying to please all the time.
Yeah.
And that they really do not understand the retail organisation behind that buyer, and they certainly don't understand the consumer.
Well, in my
And
experience,
it's the same sort of problem perpetuating.
I mean, my experience, with most companies, they're always looking towards what's the best seller, and they want to clone the best seller, looking backwards.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the comments that I forgot to mention.
They're not looking at the consumer.
Well, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Sanjay Gupta from National Institute of Fashion Technology, India. Talking about this user-centered design, when you're trying to develop a user profile, it might be possible in a situation where the market has matured and market individuals are people who can define their choices and can tell you. In a situation like developing countries where population may not be mature enough to profile their techniques, what kind of interface do you suggest?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because one of the comments that I was making, I think it was Anita Roddick that said this, in her understanding of perception of market research and marketing. She said it was like driving a car, but continuously looking in the rear mirror. So you're looking backwards all the time in order to go forwards. And I think there's a lot of truth in what she says. We don't seem to have developed positive forward-looking techniques of genuinely looking forward. And we sort of lull ourselves into a false sense of security. This is not any criticism against the people in the room at the moment, about standard marketing techniques and market research techniques that are there, and thinking that they're absolutely gospel. Where really, it's very much based on past performance, the past all the time. We haven't fully developed, techniques of genuinely looking to the future. And certainly some of the examples that I gave, these are proven companies, who are already doing it. And then, as I say, they're reducing that speculation, gathering those requirements, and it's proving itself successful in the marketplace. Because in many cases, I agree with you, Sasha, that a lot of customers, don't know what they want. But it's up to us to find out what they want, and to go out there and set systems in place to establish what they want.
It may have been fortuitous, but I praise the organisers of the conference for doing this on purpose. But I found that Angela's papers and Professor Moscovitch's papers fit together so well. Because Angela, you were talking about the crucial importance of developing skills and placement. And really, we can't teach these aspects that Tim's been talking about. The students have got to experience it for themselves, learn for themselves, bad practice as well as good practice, and inculcate the notions of where things are going.
They're not soft skills at all.
They're not at all, they're
the
essential.
so-called soft skills.
And I think it's true that in the UK, the successful textile fashion departments are those where the students are exposed to industry.
I was hoping we might get a question from America.
Yes, Tracy Plumley, North Carolina State University. First, a comment. I really applaud your interest in your direction. I think it's wonderful. I guess this is half comment and half question for a reaction. One of the things that I find with our program is that the process that we've had in place historically to select competitively the students that go into the design program tends to filter us into the program the students who are self-indulgent and creative and have spent their entire life indulging their creative process, and so then we bring them in, and then how do you teach them to to view that
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I don't want to give the wrong impression. I mean, there's no way are we suggesting we want to squash that self-indulgence, you know, because that's central sort of to creativity. But I think the self-indulgence needs to be directed in the context of a greater understanding of what it's for at the end of the day. And what it's for is, you know, the clothes that we wear, the rooms that we inhabit, the seats that we sit on. Do you know what I mean? And there's just too many general preconceptions about what these things are. And it's a very simple notion, really. We need to find out far more accurately what these issues are, you know. Like the example that I gave, it was intriguing for me to hear, and I said to John, you know, as a technologist, technologists are now looking at these intangibles. Comfort. How do we put a finger on what comfort is? You know, they were talking about labeling for comfort. I think that's great. But I mean, I think it's getting the balance, you know, between the two things, really.
And I think sometimes it seems to be something that students grow into, and I think that's one of the challenges. I mean, for myself, when I've created a challenge with a practical problem, to me that stimulates me creatively, and I find it all the more inspiring. But many times I find the students, as soon as there are limitations imposed, then it becomes an inhibition and a difficulty.
Instead of a challenge.
But I think the other thing too, I mean, it comes back to what Sanjay was saying earlier, that part and parcel of all of this as an outcome, I think it's finding a conduit for sharing that creativity with the customer, the consumer, in a better way. Do you know what I mean?
Thank you.